course, if we know anything about Adam Smith, we know this expression, the invisible hand, which, again, I have to say, most people who invoke Smith and invoke this idea had absolutely no idea what they're talking about. And that's why we're in college, right? To get a leg up, to know what we're talking about. But it is a rather strange thing. You start reading Smith, and maybe you're just reading the highlights of Smith. It's a big book. It's a thick book. It's well worth reading, every word of it. But it's a big book, and we don't find this phrase, the invisible hand. I mean, there are all sorts of things that go that way in the early chapters that we've already gone over. But where does the expression invisible hand actually appear? It appears late in the book. In this edition I'm using, it appears on page 572, which is book 3, I believe, of The Wealth of Nations. Sorry, it's actually book 4. It's book 4. So even farther in, chapter 2 of book 4, which I gave you part of it to read, is a very interesting discussion, but it is a contexted discussion, out of which this famous, incredibly powerful idea of the invisible hand actually emerges. And it's about restraint of trade. It's about the very natural thought that if you're interested in your country's well-being, that you would do everything you could to encourage trade to stay at home. That is, you would perhaps be initially, again with the best intentions, be interested in encouraging people to, by law and regulation, tariffs, import duties, other regulations, to keep investment at home rather than to have investment go abroad. That is, if you're, this is, again, I'm a layman, I'm not an economist or historian of economics, but generally the idea is mercantilism. That is, that the whole country is better off the more wealth we produce at home and the less that goes overseas to others. Again, it's an idea that makes sense, and it's an idea that Smith is arguing against. And again, a very important thing, that is, people nowadays in politics will invoke Adam Smith whenever they want to condemn regulations of any sort. And that's really simplifying Smith to quite a degree. But he is arguing here that this mercantilist attempt to encourage the home industry is self-defeating. Chapter is called of restraints upon the importation from foreign countries of such goods as can be produced at home, and the idea that we want to produce them at home rather than import them from abroad. That would be good for us all, which it would. Smith it would, I guess. But it may not be the best thing to do this in all cases. It may actually be self-defeating. And he asks the question, whether, he says, but whether it tends, this sort of regulation, tariffs, duties, whether it tends either to increase the general industry of the society or to give it the most advantageous direction is not perhaps altogether so evident. And he has, argument that, you can only produce so much in a country, and the notion that we should encourage industries by regulating imports, this will somehow make us all richer, is kind of an illusion. It'll just shift our general investment capital from one place to another, but it won't produce the overall good, the overall increase in opulence or wealth that we might hope for. And besides, he says that human nature being what it is, there's no need to do it anyway. And this is the specific context of the invisible hand. In speaking of an entrepreneur, of a business person, he says, that the person can be expected to be self-interested. So one of the things we can expect is that that person will put their capital in whatever is most profitable. So it may be that they invest overseas. They put their money overseas to produce overseas. But there are other self-interested considerations that may prevent them from doing so. And one of them is that, people don't like their goods to be too far away. They like them to be nearby so they can keep an eye on them and feel secure. So he says, home is in this manner the center, if I may say so, around which the capitals of the inhabitants of every country are continually circulating and towards which they are always tending. But as people will want to invest at home anyway, they will want to produce things nearby, purely out of their self-interest, again, right? Not because they have in mind the good of their country, some form of economic patriotism. Far from it. They just feel more comfortable if their goods, their capital investment are close by. So he says, and this is the famous passage, but the annual revenue of every society is always precisely equal to the exchangeable value of the whole annual produce of its industry, or rather is precisely the same thing with that exchangeable value. As every individual, therefore, endeavors as much as he can, both to employ his capital in the support of domestic industry, and so to direct that industry that its produce may be of the greatest value, every individual necessarily labors to render the annual revenue of the society as great as he can. The sense in which individuals, in seeking the greatest return on their capital, the greatest wealth to themselves, are at the same time increasing the general revenue of the country that is doing a public service with no thought of that end, conscious end in mind, but nevertheless, excuse me, in pursuit of their own self-interest, doing so without intending it. He generally, indeed, neither intends to promote the public interest, nor knows how much he is promoting, but preferring the support of domestic industry to that of foreign industry, again, because he wants to employ his capital close by so he can keep an eye on it, and therefore he's supporting domestic industry. He intends only his own security, and by directing that industry in such a manner as its produce may be of the greatest value, he intends only his own gain. And he is in this, as in many other cases, led by an invisible hand. There it is, page 572. To promote an end which was no part of his intention. Nor is it always the worse for the society that it was no part of it. That is, society is no worse off that he was just being selfish. By pursuing his own interest, he frequently promotes that of the society more effectually than when he really intends to promote it. That is, he may do more good by selfishly pursuing gain than he would ever do by giving to charity. That seems to be the implication. I have never known much good done by those who pretended to trade for the public good. Very influential quote. You'll see that invoked a lot. It is an affectation, pretense, indeed, not very common among merchants, and very few words need be employed in dissuading them from it. Nice bit of irony there by Smith. Again, a brilliant rhetorically, brilliant prose, and a brilliant analysis, which, again, may or may not be true, but there it is. That is, there is the thing itself, the actual discussion, which is, of course, a specific discussion about a specific issue, whether or not governments or other authorities should regulate the economy in such a way as to lawfully, by the force of law, promote domestic industry, domestic production, domestic creation of wealth, or not. That leads to a much bigger, or a point of a more general significance, and that is that in this case, as in so many others, individuals seem to be led by an invisible hand to do the good for the society, to do good for others. But we've seen this from way back at this point, and now it's been given a name, the invisible hand. But generally, again, supporting the idea, again, of what is the ethical relevance here? Why are we reading it? That ethics is, it's not that it's really absolutely pernicious to business. It's just needless. If we have the invisible hand, we don't need ethics. If we've got these mechanisms in place that ensure that the pursuit of individual self-interest will result in the social good, that is, if we have the results of altruism without altruism, then we're cool. And, you know, this is very, very interesting thesis, especially for what we're doing, because it more or less calls into question, I think, the usefulness of this course, which is always a good thing to do in a philosophy course, to question.